Doy ahora la palabra al excelente.
I now give the floor to His Excellency Péter Szijjártó, Minister of Foreign Relations and Trade of Hungary.
Permission, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues. Unfortunately, I have to start by saying that we are living in the age of dangers. And 34 years ago, when we got rid of our communist oppressors and we shifted from a one-party dictatorship to parliamentary democracy, and we shifted from a planned communist economy to market economy, or 25 years ago when we joined NATO, or 21 years ago when we joined the European Union, we would not have thought that we will be faced once again with the phantom of Cold War. And similarly, a couple of years ago, we would not have thought that war would return to Europe. And dear colleagues, Your Excellencies, nowadays this is the reality. We are faced with the phantom of the Cold War, and war returned to Europe. I'm representing Hungary, a country which is a neighboring country to Ukraine. That means that for the last 2.5 years, we have been living in the shadow of a war. 2.5 years, almost 1,000 days. And we have been confronted with the consequences. 1.3 million refugees. Even nowadays, there are several hundreds of schools and kindergartens in Hungary which enroll the children of the refugee families. And we have been paying a price of a war which is not our war, and for the outbreak of which we do not bear any kind of responsibility. So I do believe that almost after 1,000 days, the real question is not what we do think about the war, but the real question is how peace could be made. Or even more precisely, Mr. President, the question is, which is the fastest way to peace? Because we have to pick that one, the fastest one. Because the later peace will be reached, the more people will die, the more destruction will take place, and more families will be torn apart. And we Hungarians don't want more destruction. We don't want more families to be torn apart. We don't want to see more videos about violent conscription. We don't want more people to die. Especially putting into consideration the 150,000 Hungarians living in Ukraine, a community members of which have been mobilized to the Ukrainian army. Many of them have been deployed to the front line, and unfortunately, many of them have died already. And I think that after almost 1,000 days, this is high time to make an honest stock-taking and to analyze what has worked out and what has not worked out, what the international community or Europe has made as a reaction to the war. And if we are honest to ourselves, we have to say that practically nothing has worked out what international community and Europe has done as a reaction to this war. Nothing has worked out what was based on an assumption that there might be a solution at the battlefield. We have to raise the question honestly whether weapon deliveries have made any sense. And obviously they have made no sense. No sense because weapon deliveries have not changed the situation at the battlefield, and they have not brought us closer to peace either. Weapon deliveries have only increased the volume of weapons on both sides of the front line, causing more casualties and causing the prolongation of the war. And I do hope that those who are still thinking about delivering more weapons to Ukraine will consider this impact and this consequence as well. And similarly, I hope that those who are supposed to make decisions whether the weapons delivered from the West would be allowed to be used against strategic depth in Russia will make a responsible decision. Because if Western weapons will be allowed to be targeted at strategic depth for Russia, that would cause a serious risk of escalation for sure. And I do believe that in case of such a crisis situation, we really have to put into consideration the weight, the significance of words. Because in such situation, words do have a much more serious significance than in peace times. And we are seriously concerned in Hungary about the open and shameless reference of possible use of nuclear weapons. So, dear colleagues, basically nothing has worked out of those measures which have been based on the assumption that there might be a battlefield solution. That means that solution must be looked after somewhere else. And if you raise the question, where should we look for this solution, then the answer is around the negotiating table. Therefore, Hungary argues in favor of an immediate ceasefire and the start of peace talks. This would be the fastest way to peace. And with this, with starting peace talks, many lives will be saved. I know it's easy to say, but very complicated to implement. Why? Because international liberal mainstream made peace as a cuss word. And whoever argues in favor of peace will be immediately attacked and stigmatized. And that's a huge mistake as well, that diplomacy is now being given a diverted definition. Many would like us to believe that diplomacy is only about talking to those with whom you agree 100%. This is not diplomacy, this is something else. This is not an achievement. Diplomacy is a capacity to talk to those with whom you might not agree, to talk to those with whom you might disagree in everything. And here I do believe, Mr. President, that the United Nations should have a great role, because United Nations was not established as a group of like-minded countries. It was established to give platform for everyone to talk to everyone about everything. And UN gives a legitimate possibility even for those countries who are at war with each other to talk to each other. Therefore, we reject any kind of federalistic efforts which would limit or restrict us in whom we would like to talk in the framework of United Nations and what would be the topic. I'm representing a small or mid-sized, depends on the level of self-confidence, country coming from Central Europe, a landlocked one. And I have to tell you that we do consider it as nonsense and unacceptable that the representatives of the big powers are not ready to talk to each other. Because the fact that they don't talk to each other, that poses a serious security risk on us. And there's another risk that they don't talk to each other. If they don't talk to each other, then the world can easily be divided into blocks again. And that's a nightmare for us. Why? Because we have already experienced it once. We have lost 40 years of our lives, 4 decades, when the world was divided into blocks. Therefore, we have to speak very clearly. We don't want such kind of period to come back. We don't want the world to be divided into blocks again. And I would like to disillusion everybody. It would not only be us to lose everything, or almost everything, in case the world's going to be divided into blocks. Everybody would lose on that. I do believe that a civilized East to West cooperation could bring a lot of profit to the whole world. Therefore, we Hungarians argue in favor of connectivity. We wish the next period, the next part of global history would be not about a new Cold War, but would be about connectivity. And although we are a relatively small country, but we can serve as a good example. What a big growth potential is being represented by a civilized East to West cooperation. We have been carrying out a pragmatic, patriotic foreign policy based on common sense and aiming at reaching the national interests. And as an outcome of that, Hungary became a meeting point of East and West. The biggest corporates of the Eastern and Western economies are meeting in Hungary. Imagine in Hungary, the top German premium car makers and the top Chinese electric battery manufacturers are not only working together in one country, in one city, they are building their factories next to each other on the neighboring plots. So therefore, I have to underline that the strategies of those corporates which have a determining impact on continental economies cannot be successful without free global economic cooperation. Dear colleagues, it has not been a long time ago that that time Federal Chancellor of Germany was speaking about a economic and trade cooperation zone starting from Lisbon, ending at Vladivostok. And it has not been a long time ago that European political leaders spoke about Eurasian cooperation. Unfortunately, nowadays, we are far away. But it's not impossible to return there. But there's one very important major precondition. Global politics must change fundamentally. What would that mean? It means in our reading that global politics must come back to the basis of mutual respect. And dialogue and diplomacy must return as the major tools here. And this is absolutely not hopeless, because our experience here at the General Assembly being convened in New York, our experiences do prove that the friends of peace are in majority in this chamber. And we Hungarians are proud to be part of this global majority for peace. And we are ready to support all global initiatives which are aiming at reaching peace. And we are ready to discuss all peace plans. And we consider it as unacceptable that some countries would like to give exclusivity to one or another peace plan, acting as if the other one would not exist. We absolutely want all peace plans to be discussed. And here I would like to commend the People's Republic of China and Brazil for putting together a plan. And we do hope that that plan will be on the agenda as well. Dear colleagues, if we could reach peace, it would not only save lives of the people, but would give a big support, a big help to many countries in the transatlantic community where I'm coming from, to get rid of the huge burden of hypocrisy. And I tell you why. Many Western colleagues of ours like to say that they got rid of the energy sources of Russia, for example. This is one of the biggest fake news ever. Because the Western countries continued to do business with Russia just like others. They just simply deny it. If you look at the share of Russian gas in the LNG ports in western part of Europe, you might be surprised. Or if you have a look at the oil arriving to the western countries in Europe, where it comes from originally, you might be surprised as well. And if you look at who is the #1 uranium supplier of this very country, United States, you would be surprised as well. In order to avoid your homework to look for it, this is the Russian Federation. Dear colleagues, all these prove that economic sanctions are totally useless in this regard. They absolutely don't work out. They put much more harm on some European economies than on the Russian economy. Many Western countries and Western economies do evade the sanctions. So I think it's no wonder that we cannot recall any successful sanction mechanism in history. These sanctions do not make any sense as well. Dear colleagues, the war in Ukraine puts a serious security risk on Europe. But this is not the only security risk there. We in Europe have been faced with massive waves of illegal migration, and unfortunately, Brussels made a huge mistake there because they wanted to manage migration instead of stopping it. And this approach has encouraged a massive number of people to hit the road, to pay thousands of euros to smugglers, and take the life hazard to come to Europe. But we Hungarians, we do stick to our own right to make a decision on our own, whom we allow to enter the territory of our country and whom we are ready to live together. And I think, Mr. President, that UN is the best place to recall international law. International law speaks very clearly. Everyone who has to escape from his or her home has the right to stay temporarily on the territory of the first safe country, but not on the second, on the third, or the fourth one. Therefore, Hungary will continue to stop the flow of illegal migration on its border, through which basically we save Europe from further huge security-related challenges. And in the meantime, this is insane that while Hungary is protecting its border, has to pay a fine of multiple tens of hundreds of millions of euros because of complying with international law. So my summary goes as follows, Mr. President. In the last 10 years, Hungary has carried out a pragmatic, patriotic foreign policy strategy aiming at national interest and guaranteeing the security of our own citizens. And we will continue to do so, as we will continue to be always honest and open. And we will do always what we say, and we will always say what we think. It might be unusual nowadays. How it is possible? It is possible because there's an unusual political stability in Hungary, which is very unique in Europe. We have won all elections in the last 18 years, the one-party right-wing government. That means that people like what we are doing, they support what we are doing, and they give the approval to continue. And the government will continue. We will not have the intention to satisfy NGOs or external actors, but we will always have the intention to satisfy our own electorate, our own citizens, because we do believe that democracy is all about that, the people. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Doy las gracias al ministro.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary.